Um, Hi, good evening once again, everyone. We will be continuing with the series of tutorials, and I think I left you off at this point where we were discussing the polling and the outcomes of an election, right? So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be moving on in order to see what exactly is it, what exactly are the things that make an election process in India truly democratic. Again, it's quite self-explanatory. We will be very quickly moving through it, and yes, let me just begin by sharing my screen first and foremost. And I hope at this point my screen is visible. Just a second. Here we are. Lovely. So from the current slide. Great. So, what is it that makes an election in India truly democratic? We are going to be looking at that broadly from three perspectives. Number one would be the very fact that India is one of those very few countries which has an independent election commission, in which the legislature or the lawmaking institutions have very little role to play or to intervene in a fairly independent election commission of India, which is quite remarkable. Not to mention the fact that the public has a very high sentiment regarding the election process. It's almost like a festival in this country, right? If you observe your surroundings, elections carry a lot of emotion along with them. They carry a lot of sentimental value as well, right? To the extent, in some cases, we begin to consider our own political leaders as gods, but that is something that can be definitely toned down. But anyway, so popular participation of the public in the election process is something that we are going to be looking at as a sign, as a very healthy sign of what makes election in India truly democratic. And last but not the least, a fair acceptance, right, of the election outcome as the will of the people. Janta ki marzi. You would often hear politicians talk about कि अरे ये तो जनता की मर्जी है, ठीक है, जनता चाहती ये है, चाहती वो है, ठीक है, हम तो जनता के साथ ही जाते हैं. Lot of stuff, typical political stuff, right? So we are going to be broadly discussing these, and we'll see how quickly we can wrap this up. We'll begin with the Independent Election Commission, right? So Election Commission of India is an independent body, as I mentioned, the ECI. It is very much in Delhi, right? I mean the headquarters, the main office. Of course, states have their own independent offices, right? So it is responsible for conducting elections. And when I say conducting elections, I am talking about elections at all levels, right? The Lok Sabha elections, the at the central level, then the state elections, right? And of course, the local elections as well, right? So it is the election commission which is responsible for conducting elections, for maintaining the sanctity, the integrity of the democratic process of election, right? And it enjoys a very high level of independence, usually comparable to the judiciary itself. And judiciary is one of the organs, right? You have the legislature, you have the executive, and then you have the judiciary. And an independent judiciary is like the hallmark of a democratic setup, right? And of course, we have the chief election commissioner, usually an IAS officer, right, a bureaucrat, who heads the election commission, and is elected by the president of India. And the chief justice of this nation is also chief justice of India, like the chief justice of Supreme Court, right, is also elected, or not, is nominated rather, by the president of India, not elected. Okay. And in fact, I should change my wording here as well. It is not chief commissioner is not elected. Chief commissioner is nominated. Please make a change. Right. I will also change it when I go through my notes once again before sending it to you. Right. So nominated by the president of India. Right. Um, However, once you become the chief election commissioner, you are only duty bound to the election protocol, the election law, the constitution, and you are answerable neither to the president, definitely, nor to the ruling government, right? You are answerable in no way for your actions. If you deem something to be healthy for the election process, you are welcome to take action, right? And often it leads to a tussle. You can quite very well understand the ruling parties tend to not view election processes very favorably because it tends to go against them in some cases. However, you still cannot remove the chief election commissioner from his post. There is a certain protocol for that. And again, there are certain safeguards in place. Right. So when I talk about the Election Commission of India as a body, what exactly are the powers that we are looking at? And of course, taking this again very, very general powers, right? I mean, taking decision on every aspect of elections, controlling them, conducting them, announcing कि election कब होगा, ठीक है, कैंडिडेट्स की लिस्ट कैसे बनेगी, नॉमिनेशन कैसे फाइल होगा, रिजल्ट्स कब मतलब वोट पोलिंग कब होगा, पोलिंग का दिन कौन सा है, जगह कौन सी है, पोलिंग बूथ्स किधर हैं, रिजल्ट्स कैसे डिक्लेयर होंगे, कब होंगे, किस टाइम पे होंगे, ए टू जेड, राइट, ऑल ऑफ इट comes under the ambit of the Election Commission of India. Like no other body makes that decision except them. So they automatically makes them quite powerful, right? Implements the moral code of conduct, of course, administers the oath and all. It also implements the election law, tends to punish the candidates who violate it, including the revoking of the election result, right? I have discussed this. And it issues a certain set of guidelines, particularly to the ruling government, which controls the government's power, the resources. Because if you remember, candidates are not allowed to use government resources, right, as per law, in order to fight elections, right? And the Election Commission of India appoints election officers who are duty bound only to serve the election commission and the interests of the election process and not the government. I want you to try and remember what happened in Mexico with the PRI party, the PRI party. I don't want you to forget that. I don't want you to forget prior information. I want you to recollect what happened in Mexico when PRI, that is the PRI, made use of government officials in order to facilitate its victory in elections. And that is completely against democratic ethics, right? That is something that we don't follow in our nation, right? Fair enough. So if there's a bureaucrat on election duty, if there's an IS officer on election duty, the IS officer is bound to conduct the election in a free and fair manner without being hampered, without the process being hampered by anyone from the ruling party or even the opposition party or whatever. Anyway, from any political candidate, so to speak, right? Even independent candidates, right? Yeah, so this of course goes without saying. If the election officer, the presiding election officer of any constituency feels that there was some malpractice involved, that the election was not conducted in a manner that was free and fair and just, they can order, this such is the power, right? They can order a repoll. So the voting will happen again. Right. And again, all of this would not have happened had all the powers been with the ruling party and not the election commission. So it is the election commission which can do all of this. So that is why it automatically becomes independent and powerful. It's a beautiful institution, right, which we have. And now all credit to them. So we have been having elections for the past 75 years, right? And it's a rarity in a nation like ours, in a very socio-politically complex nation like ours. It is a rarity. It's difficult, right? So that is that. Popular participation of the public is the second feature that we are looking at. I think I briefly discussed this कि लोग कितने participative हैं, कितने involved हैं election के process में. See, I will not go to the extent of saying that we have a very high percentage of people who are coming out to vote in large numbers. See, that is the challenge that we're still grappling with. A lot of them are not aware of their fundamental duties towards the nation. Everybody wants to talk about fundamental rights, obviously, but nobody talks about fundamental duties, right? Duties are important. So voting is something that you ought to do as a citizen. However, our Voter turnout is not that high. Anyway, it is still fairly decent. However, you need to understand that if the election process itself is unbiased, if there's one political party which has been ruling since eternity, right, it will obviously go to show that there is something that is wrong. Right, since the beginning of the 21st century itself, we have first had Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government. Then we had UPA 1 that came in 2004. Then we had UPA 2 that came in 2009. Then they lasted until 2014. So UPA ruled for a decent group. Manmohan Singh was the prime minister from 2004 to 2014. Then we had NDA coming into power with Narendra Modi being the prime minister, being the leader of the ruling party, right? The coalition rather. And they came in power in 2014. They again won in 2019. And then we are yet to see the results of the 2024 election process. So things are not biased towards just one particular political group. We also have the scope in this country for new political parties to emerge. Say the Aam Aadmi Party that came around a decade back, right? We also have regional parties that play a huge role in local politics. We have Samajwadi Party, we have BSP, we have ADMK, we have DMK, we have RJD and Biju Janata Dal, and we have lots of such parties as well, which command a lot of influence, right? So people are involved, right, in this process. ठीक है. People का participation एक statistic के through measure करते हैं. I just use this term as well. Voter turnout. It is a mathematical indicator of how many eligible people have turned out to vote for a particular election. Um, so what we have noticed is somehow, if you actually observe the trend, it is very interesting in our country. If you look at the Western nations like the United States or even the European Union, you will realize that the voter turnout is quite low in comparison to ours. And ours is also not very high, to be honest. 40s, 40%, it is hanging. It depends from election to election also. Sometimes it does go up. On an average 40-50% होगा. ठीक है. Right. So in our case, it has remained stable at least. And in some cases, as I mentioned, depending on the election, it has gone up also. So it's a thing in our favor, right? And funnily enough, if you look at the statistics of voting in our country, it is the people who belong to the rural areas, the so-called poor, the so-called illiterate and underprivileged people, they turn out to vote in larger numbers rather than the more affluent sections of our society, which is a very interesting thing that you can think about. Why is it that the upper middle class or even the so-called 1% of the Indian society, the creme de la creme, so to speak, why is it that their voter turnout is comparatively lesser than that of the slightly underprivileged sections of our society? Yeah, this is a very interesting fact, which of course I will not give you the direct answer to. This is something that you might want to research on, right? And of course, this also I have mentioned that हमारे देश में काफी sentimental value है. There is a lot of sentimental value that is attached to the election process itself, because people feel like they have the tendency to feel that even today they have immense respect for politicians. Okay, you can see that on the streets. You can see that in the discussions that you may have at home. You can see that in the manner in which news is presented to us. Right, politicians command a lot of respect. Right. And so does subsequently the political process, the election process, right? Because it is a way through which people can address issues, concerns, highlight them in front of the government, and hope, keep their fingers crossed that the government will take cognizance of their concerns, right? ठीक है. एक तो now there are two forms of involvement. One is the direct involvement in which people actually stand for elections or the people go out and vote in an election. But then there are ancillary things as well, right? I mean, working towards helping the election process be successful. Maybe as a volunteer, as a karyakarta, you never know, right? So, for instance, in the 2004 Lok Sabha elections in which the UPA came to power, more than one third of the voters took part in the election campaign related activities, right? Supporting your local MP, going door to door, campaigning, stuff like that. They're directly involved in the election campaigning process. And it's a beautiful statistic that in our country, one out of every seven voters is associated with some political party or the other, either directly or indirectly. ठीक है? They could just be members or there could be volunteers. Nowadays, we have IT cells as well. Congress has its IT cell, BJP has its IT cell. So a lot of techies are also involved in uh, spreading the good work that is being done by political parties online. Okay, so that is that, right? So this is the involvement of people, right? Popular participation of the public. That is one way of looking at elections in India. And then acceptance of the election outcome itself, right? As I mentioned, कि जब इलेक्शन देखो इलेक्शन का रिजल्ट जब तक नहीं आता है देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ मड स्लिंगिंग राइट there is a lot of hitting out at rivals and not literal hitting out as in verbal hitting. There are a lot of debates, a lot of discussions, right? That's what makes us a thriving democracy. However, once the results are declared, everyone accepts, nobody cribs, nobody cries. You will actually not find political parties crying over election results, usually. Okay. And there are a lot of statistics to prove that. I just gave UPA and NDA's example right from the beginning of the 21st century, right? Right from Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government in the early 2000s all the way till UPA coming to power for 10 years and Modi ji's government coming to power for almost 10 years. Right, and it's been quite the journey. Right, and we do not know yet who is going to be elected. You never know, maybe some local party comes to power at the center in 2024. Indian politics is always very unpredictable. And there is a tendency for ruling parties in India, if you see it all the way from the 1950s, of course, Congress has had a considerable stretch. They have won quite a bit, quite a few number of elections. But usually the tendency is at the national and the state level, the tendency is anti-incumbency, right? Ruling parties tend to lose out on elections. Right? And statistics say that in the last 25 years, the ruling party has lost every 2 out of 3 elections. So these are all statistics. These are all statistics available with the Election Commission of India. Yeah, the ruling party has lost every 2 out of 3 elections, which is a good indicator that people want change, and when they want change, they're getting that change. Right? It's a good indicator. Okay. Now, in the United States, which is a Western democracy, and a sitting elected representative who they call senators, right? They rarely tend to lose an election. So incumbent is the word that we are using here. Incumbent matlab the person who is currently in power, right? Incumbent. Sitting matlab not literally sitting. Sitting as in the person who's currently holding that position of authority. Rarely loses elections. However, in India, a local MLA might lose the next election, might never ever come to power again. Who knows? So things change in this country. And हमारे देश में people who try to be more aggressive with their politics, who try to use a lot of muscle power, who try to use a lot of money, try to use a lot of their influence, also lose. It is not that they do not lose, right? They also lose. It's not sacrosanct. Right. And the election outcome is accepted as the will of the people. Janta ki marzi is what I explained as well. ठीक है. Again, very general facts. It's all very straightforward. And with that, we come to an end of this discussion, which is, of course, what makes an election in India truly democratic, right? The last bit of this chapter, which are challenges to free and fair elections, we are going to flip this. I'm going to allot it to you for self reading. It's just one or two paragraphs long. And again, very self explanatory. If you are logical enough, you can think of your own challenges, like use a little bit of your own brain and think of the challenges. What could be a challenge to free and fair elections in India? Right? Corruption could be a major challenge. Use of money and muscle power could be a major challenge. Dynastic politics could be a major challenge कि बेटा कि पापा पॉलिटिशियन है तो पापा पॉलिटिशियन है तो उसका बेटा तो उसके बेटे का बेटा बेटे का बेटे का बेटा right. Dynastic politics is a challenge which you can see in parties like say the Congress or the Samajwadi Party, right? It does not allow a lot of young talent to come through. Very recently, the Congress president changed after God knows how many years. Mallikarjun Kharge is now the president of the Indian National Congress, who is not from the Gandhi family. So it's a slight change in the otherwise regular paradigm of the presidents being from the Gandhi family, right? Indira Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, right? So all of them have, in some manner or the other, been the leaders of the Indian National Congress. So anyway, right, always connected to politics in India. Like it's happening around you. So you don't really need to have to sit and rack your head with this, right? So I'm going to stop here, and with that, congratulations, electoral politics is over. My warmest regards to you all. In the next session, when we meet physically, we will begin with the working of institutions. So kindly be prepared, and we shall see you all then. Right? Take care, have fun, and have a splendid weekend. Bye bye.